Welcome back to the channel. We're gonna try and do our first technique video since I've been at my new house. It's been a while since I've done one, been a while since I've done a YouTube video, but today might also set a record for one of my shorter videos because honestly, it's a pretty complex topic that is usually overcomplicated in what people think they need to do, yet the fix is really simple. And what that topic is how to fix an uneven bar position in the squat, specifically in the low bar squat. And before even moving forward on how to fix this, you do need to determine if you even need to. Because the fact of the matter is almost everyone is a little bit uneven in a lot of ways in their bench press, in their deadlift, and their squat. We're asymmetrical beings. In regards to low bar squat, there's some people that this might not really be an issue. So the three questions you should ask is it causing pain? Is it leading to any issue that is creating some type of pain, ache, or injury? Number two, is it causing any type of technical breakdown that's limiting your ability to be able to exert your maximal strength? And number three, is it simply just due to your anthropometric shoulder position? And what I mean by that, just a quick reference, generally for the population, your dominant side shoulder is going to sit lower than your non-dominant side. And that's because we tend to carry things, and over time we just tend to have a lower shoulder position on one side. So therefore, it could be reasonable to assume that the bar is going to be slightly tilted as well. Now, that's not everyone, but that's something where if you have a decent change in shoulder depression side to side just naturally occurring, might not really be something that you really can fix or need to fix. That is just your makeup. But for many of those who are listening, maybe you do need to fix this. Maybe this is causing issues. And there's numerous issues that an uneven bar position can lead to. First on the list of those potential issues is a possible uneven rib cage. So if the bar is going to be tilted, naturally that's going to take the rib cage along, and then that's going to change the relation of the rib cage position to the pelvis, and we're going to tend to need to compensate down the chain. That could be a whole nother video, and I actually do talk about that decently in my hip shift video I made. But if we're leaning into one side, it's going to hike up that hip, which is then going to change my relative internal rotation, which then could cause some type of shiftiness or unevenness, specifically at the bottom of the squat. Another compensation that you might see is someone counterbalancing the bias and weight distribution. So if that bar is offset and it's further off to your right, which means there's a greater load on the right side of your body, you'll find people starting to shift over to the opposite side to counterbalance that, and they'll stay over onto that side throughout the entirety of the movement. And then with both those factors of the uneven rib cage, the counterbalancing, and some other factors we're gonna get into as well when it comes to your grip and the tension that creates, that might lead to some twisting. To kind of, again, compensate from the unevenness of the rib cage, the shifting, and then the adjustment in bar position. You might see some twisting as you're coming up in the squat. And as we should likely know, really on all three movements on the squat, bench, and deadlift, any type of rotational aspect is something that we don't want. We're trying to fight against rotation and limit that as much as possible. And then taking those factors and usually compensatory actions, the reason those might need fixing is because they're going to create an uneven distribution of loading, which could possibly lead to two things. If we are shifting and we are doing things that are creating compensatory actions, we may be limiting our ability to exert force in an optimal manner. The squat is a bilateral movement. We want to use both sides of our body to do work as much as possible. So if we're shifted into one side, and let's say that's our left side, and that side is having to do more work and we're underutilizing our ability of our right side, we may be limiting our strength output. And then secondly, and a bit more controversial, but it's something I definitely believe in, is that if we are creating too much asymmetry in our movement and changing the distribution of workload to the muscles, aka if I'm shifted to my left side, that side in sense, especially some of the muscles, are going to be doing more work than the right, which means their workload is higher. And we should know that injury is caused by a muscle being pushed past its tolerable workload. So if we're putting ourselves in a position that's unevenly distributing that workload, it can possibly lead to some pains, aches, or injuries due to that. And to give some further insight there's two main common things that you might see from that. One, you might see some issues from that low bar position having more strain on one side than the other, which might create some type of bicep tendonitis with the shoulder and or wrist issue because of the support. One side is having to do more of the work. And if we're going back to the shiftiness and the asymmetry of what we're looking at in kind of the hips and the bottom of the squat, we'll find a lot of times that this possibly could lead to some adductor, hip, or glute issues from, again, changing that distribution of workload and not evenly distributing it throughout our body as efficiently as possible. So now that you understand the reasons we may or may not need to fix an uneven bar position in the squat, let's get into really the three main factors that I look at and the fixes for those that is going to help to adjust that bar position. And number one is going to be bar placement. Is it lined up on your back correctly? This video, honestly, is going to sound really simple, but that's the truth. This isn't a really complex fix. It's just simply a lot of times a bad habit and slight asymmetry side to side of how people are kind of lining up, and that's starting to kind of feel natural for them. So number one is, where is the bar placed on your back and getting that lined up correctly. Number two is uneven grip pressure and grip position that creates different aspects of how that bar is going to be placed and how you're going to tension side to side. And then the third one, which is a possibility, is some type of shoulder mobility issues or a grip position that just isn't optimal for you. After we look at all those things, the last thing I'm gonna do is just kind of follow up at the end with a quick breakdown of a couple of my athletes and take a look at their uneven bar position and be able to pinpoint and show you exactly where that is stemming from. So looking at reason number one, that is just having an uneven bar placement or uneven grip position of the bar. And it's pretty simple. Like, that's kind of like an oh duh, like of course it is, but that really is the number one reason most people have an uneven bar position. And it simply just comes down to being a bad habit that accumulated over time for some reason or another, whether it was like perceived tightness on the day, a different bar, whatever it may be. It could be a lot of different factors. Someone just started lining up a little crooked, and then they lined up a little bit more crooked. And then that just started feeling even to them, and that felt natural. And eventually that just became what felt like the norm in their squat. And when you actually trying to line them up, they actually feel like they're incredibly crooked again when they're straight, because that just doesn't feel like the norm. Because again, we can adapt very well to asymmetry. That's what the human body does a fantastic job at. When we start becoming asymmetrical, the body adapts, and we are able to make that feel like our norm. So with the issue being fairly simple, the fix is fairly simple as well. And really all you need to do, and I recommend, is get a buddy to help line you up. So if you find yourself continually being crooked when you sit up, to you have no idea. This feels even to you. All you need is to get a buddy to put you in that center position. Likely that's going to feel very crooked at first, but over time, usually I find about 2 weeks, you're gonna readapt to that new position, and then if you do get crooked, that's gonna feel completely off and it's gonna feel terrible to you. So it's just a matter about kind of forcing that position and getting used to it over time. The other thing is, if maybe the grip is off and you're lining up because your grip isn't placed correctly, there's two main spots that you can use to help keep that accountable. You have one, you have the knurling markers, which for me, that's what I use. Usually a taller lifter, a longer arm lifter is gonna use those knurling markers. I have my middle finger on there. Very easy to use that to help me keep me accountable. If not though, if you're inside of those, you can use basically the start of the smooth to the knurling as an accountability factor. Figure out, I would usually say, like, let's say use an example that, like, I'm a thumb's length away from the smooth. I would put my thumbs right at the smooth so they're even. I would then grip the bar so I know they're even though it's in between the smooth and knurling markers, and then get under the bar. So just finding a way to be able to keep your grip accountable so that when you're setting up, you can know that both hands are even on both sides. And if you want even a little bit of a further breakdown to this from one of my lifters, Sean Noriega, actually I think it was the second video he ever put out when I started coaching him. I'll link it down below in the description box, but this is the exact issue he had. He just legitimately was just lining up incorrectly into the bar, as well as what we're gonna get into point number two. And it was just a simple fix. It required no special drills, no special soft tissue work, no shoulder mobility stuff. Just simply was a bad habit that we're able to fix simply by keeping accountable to bar placement. And then number two, the next point, creating more symmetry with your grip side to side and how you are actually gripping the bar. So one of the main things that leads to being offset on the bar is uneven grip pressure. Now, they could be completely separate of each other, but I see a lot of times they go hand in hand. And so what I mean by uneven grip pressure is one side has a stronger grip than the other. And I'm not necessarily saying the stronger grip's better. I'm just saying one's gonna be a strong grip, thumbs wrapped around, really in grasp of the bar, and the other side is more of an open grip. And you can see there, even though I'm straight on the bar, you can see how my elbow position's different, my wrist extension's different, everything's different there because of how that grip is in relation and then allows the rest of my elbow and shoulder to place itself. Because the more of a strong, straight wrist grip we have, the more we're gonna have to get movement from the shoulder. The more extension we have, the more we're gonna get it from the wrist and not have to compensate as much of the shoulder into that ER position. And so again, neither is wrong. Some people like to have a stronger grip, some like to have a little bit more passive grips, a la like Chance Mitchell almost holds it in his fingertips. The key there is they just need to be even, because if they're not, there's a couple issues that can arise from that. Issue number one is the bar sits lower on the side that has the more open grip. So just naturally, if you have a stronger wrist position, that side is going to be a higher center of gravity because it's higher up in your hand. If our wrist is back, that side is going to sit lower because it is now lower in our fingers versus high up in our hand. It's the same thing on bench press. If you saw my post recently about wrist extension position on the bench press, the same thing happens there. The next issue, as I already kind of alluded to, is it's gonna change elbow position. The stronger grip I have, likely the higher my elbows are gonna be. The looser grip I have, and the more my fingers, the more my elbows are gonna stay under me. Again, I'm not vying for either being better or worse. That's an entirely different video of talking about the kind of optimal rack setup, which I kind of talk about in my low bar setup video. I'm more just stating that if we are asymmetrical in those positions, we have one wrist extended, you can see how much that's going to change my elbow position. Next up, if you have one grip stronger than the other, what you can very likely see is maybe you're actually lined up decently well. But as you walk out, what you're going to find, because you're going to shift back and forth during that walkout, is you're usually going to find that the bar starts shifting towards the strong grip. That weak side grip isn't really, it's more passive. It's not really holding the bar in place. And so that strong side grip is going to start pulling it that way as you walk out. And you'll actually see that on one of my athletes. That was one of the main things that was leading to it, is because they had one side more passive. It was allowing that bar to slowly trickle to that side during their walkout. And then lastly, the issue this creates is a strong grip versus a more passive grip changes the irradiation effect and the tension. If you've watched any of my bench press videos, we talked about irradiation effect of the bar grip coming down and how that creates tension in the upper back. It's the same thing for a squat. The more we have a strong grip, the more that's going to create an irradiation effect into that upper back, and it's going to be more of an active rack position in the sense. The more we are in our fingertips and wrist extended, the more we are relying on more of a passive shelf of our upper back and not having as much irradiation and tightness stemming from that grip through our arms, into our shoulders, into our upper back. So what that leads to is, again, neither is wrong unless one side is strong, one side is extended. What you're going to find is that you're going to have one side of your upper back being more passive, the other side being more active in its tensioning, and having an asymmetric distribution of tension side to side. So what is the fix for this issue? Again, it's simple. Just have even grip pressure. Now, my recommendation for most would be to match the strong grip, or match the weak grip to the strong grip and be stronger on both. I think for the majority of the population of powerlifters, especially beginners to intermediates, are likely going to benefit more from having a more active grip and a stronger grip in their low bar setup. I think I find a little bit more as people get advanced, especially more muscular and have a little bit more of a shelf to rely on. Maybe a passive grip is going to be okay, but either way, we've got to match it. So if you're finding that you're continually having, let's say the right side is a more open grip, just make sure that as you're setting up, grip that bar, hold that grip, do not let it go. Get into that rack position, set up, continue to hold that grip as you walk out, and what you're likely going to find is it's going to be a lot more even on your back. And again, like I said, a lot of times this is in combination with just setting up crooked. So even when you get the strong grip, you still naturally now are used to shifting off to a lot of times into that like open extended hand position. That's usually what's going to happen is the weaker side you're going to shift to, the stronger hand is going to pull the bar that way a bit more, and so you're going to, even with the stronger hand, you're going to find that you're still offset. So it very well might need to be in combination that you work on strong grip on both sides and get a buddy to help make sure they line you up just to start creating that symmetry, getting used to it until it's habitual. But like I said, maybe you like a more passive grip, that's great, and you just need to make sure both sides are equal on that. But the big thing there is just finding symmetry in your grip and the pressure of your grip on both sides. Now the last issue, and I put it last because I think it's actually the least common, is If you actually lack shoulder mobility, on one side in particular, that creates an inability to be able to get in position properly to where that bar is even on the back. And then secondary to that is having a grip width that allows you to get in position while still having a good rack. Obviously, the closer you are, the more that's going to create a need for shoulder mobility. The wider you are, the less you're going to have a need for shoulder mobility, but the less you're going to be able to create a really strong or large rack position to be able to rest that bar on. There's not really a right and wrong. That could be a completely different video of trying to figure out kind of what is your optimal rack position. But again, you're trying to find a happy medium. What allows you to get the most stable rack position in that low bar while still allowing those shoulders to have enough room for mobility to be able to get under the bar and maintain their position, for the most part, fairly symmetrical. And one of the reasons I made this the last point and don't think it's as common of an issue is I have over time biased more and more to what I call the Quinn Hinnock way of thinking. Quinn Hinnock is known for whenever people ask him, how do I get better front rack mobility for Olympic lifting? He says, get into the front rack position more. That's the best way to increase it. And for powerlifting, I'd say the same thing. If you want to get better shoulder mobility for the low bar squat, you should low bar squat, because it's not just about mobility, it's also about stability and strength in that position. You can work on your external rotation and shoulder mobility all you want, but that doesn't mean you can hold that load stable in that position with 400 plus pounds on your back. So the best way to get better shoulder mobility is to low bar squat. And the best way to make sure that you are even and getting proper position on both sides goes back a lot to what I said before with making sure we have proper bar placement centered, as well as symmetrical grip pressure. Now, with that being said, shoulder mobility could be a limiting factor here. And so one of the ways you can do that is through this simple test I'm going to give you. Now, this isn't definitive to where if you do this, you're gonna be like, oh my gosh, I have horrible shoulder mobility. It's just to help kind of give you a starting point. But what you'd want to do is kind of lay in a sit-up position. You can kind of see my legs, but it's just knees bent, feet down. Make sure my lower back is pushed against the floor, not arched, and then my shoulders are down against the floor. From there, I'm gonna put my arms straight out in a 90-degree position. Without losing any position of that shoulder contact and the low back, I'm going to allow my arm to drop passively, and I can see there, without my shoulder rising up, because that gives me more, just passively letting it down, that is the amount of internal rotation I have passively on that side. The opposite being true, which is a bit more important for the low bar squat, is the external rotation. So for me, I'm not letting my rib cage flare up, which would give me kind of a false sense of external rotation. I'm keeping that low back down, keeping that shoulder pinned, just letting my arm drop. That's the amount of external rotation I have. The degrees don't matter as much in what I'm looking for here, barring you are extremely limited. It's more, if you do that, is there a significant difference side to side? And is the side that there's significant difference on the one you're struggling, wanting to have the more open wrist position, and kind of the bars wanting to kind of shift away from? If so, maybe on that side we are lacking a little bit of external rotation, and that's somewhat limiting what your ability is to be able to get that more symmetrical bar position. So if you do find shoulder mobility for you might be a limiting factor, I'm going to include in the description box below some of the drills that I really find beneficial. A couple of them are going to be in a Dropbox link I'm going to share, and the other one is just a link to a YouTube video, but if shoulder mobility is an issue, that is where I would start. And even if you don't necessarily have a shoulder mobility issue, and that's the root cause of why we have the uneven bar position, some people may just find them beneficial because it allows you to get under the bar and feel comfortable sooner within the workout. It's not uncommon for me to have someone say that, yeah, my rack position, it just felt off until I got to my top set, and then it started to feel a little more comfortable. And a lot of that is just because of a perceived tightness effect of what they're feeling. So those shoulder mobility drills can kind of just help to kind of create a perceived loosening effect and a perceived opening effect in the shoulder external rotation and that rack position, and allow you to get more comfortable under the bar sooner so that you're able to replicate those positions and be able to get into that proper rack. And again, like I said, I think low bar is the best way to improve that shoulder mobility and that rack position. So just be able to give yourself kind of the potential to get into the best position possible from the get-go, and then let the low bar position do the majority of the work in creating the sustained progress and strength in that position is the best way to go in my opinion. All right, so to wrap up, I want to give some quick athlete breakdown so you can kind of see what I talked about between the uneven bar placement, the uneven grip, and then the shoulder mobility kind of taking effect and kind of how that then translates to the issues we might see in someone's squat. So taking a look, first we have a NOS. The initial things, the two things you're gonna see is one, notice these neural markers. His right hand is further out on that bar to the neural marker than his left hand is. So from there, you can see, you can't see any smooth on this side, but you can see some smooth on this side. So naturally from that grip placement, he's having that bar shifted off to his left, because if you actually look at his arms, they look actually pretty even for the most part in the sense of their relation to the shoulder. The bar's offset though, because the bar is just crooked in his hands. Second to that, we're gonna get a little bit of lean here for the reason that you can see he has a more open grip on his right hand. That's creating, again, that's kind of adding to the fact that it's gonna want to tilt to his right side. And then from there, we can see what kind of happens in the bottom position. For a NOS, this isn't that significant of an issue. He actually does pretty well with it. It doesn't really cause too much pain per se. He does tend to seemingly have a little bit of right QL pain, which I think is very much correlated to this and the just uneven distribution. And he does tend to be a little bit shifty in the bottom. So it's definitely something we're trying to work on, but I would say in the grand scheme of things, his isn't a significant issue. But if we are to fix that, the two things we need to do is one, set that grip up even, two, have a little bit of a stronger grip on that right hand. Next up, we're gonna take a look at Zach. Zach's was pretty simple. It just simply comes from this right hand. And and the bar isn't really offset, you can see it's actually decently even on his back, but notice because of that more open grip, he is able to have that elbow down more, especially here. It creates that bar to sit lower, the elbow's lower, that shoulder is even lower. You can even look at that shoulder in comparison to the trap is lower than this side because anytime that elbow pushes forward, it's gonna create a little bit more relative protraction and also just be a little more passive with that rack position there versus this side has more relative retraction and has a little bit more active rack position there that's a little bit stronger. So that bar is just sitting lower on that right side. The issue we saw with Zach is it would create rotation for him especially. And that happens a lot when we see this asymmetrical bar position and open grip, is he was gonna start rotating towards his left side as he came up, and it was creating a bit of an issue with kind of strength output. He was a lot stronger when we could keep a straighter bar position, and the grip, that's the fix simply for him, was just being stronger with that grip. And then lastly, we've got Sean, and I already kind of alluded to in the video he put out, we talked about how he fixed this, but first I'll kind of show you the issues and then I'll show you the actual video of kind of how it occurred. So the biggest thing, he had two issues. One, you can see a pretty significant difference here in that grip being more passive on his right side, and that created not even an uneven bar position, it allowed an uneven bar position. So what you're gonna see here when we actually look at the video is he actually sets up decently straight. That's not too bad. But as he walks out, notice that bar shifting more and more off to his left side because that passive side is allowing that strong side to pull it. And then from there, you can see how he's having to counterbalance by crunching in to that right oblique, which then I think I have it, I have it going all the way down. He had an issue then of really shifting into that right side and being really shifty, and actually had some adductor issues from it that could possibly have translated from this. He did a lot of stuff to try and work on IR on both sides, and it helped a little bit, but I think the biggest fix for it was creating a more natural bar position. And for him, he actually goes more passive on both sides now. That was the actual fix for him. That's where I said that, like, I would probably recommend going strong on both sides for most people, but Sean found being more passive on both sides worked better for him and allowed him to maintain that more even bar position and not allow that walkout to shift it more and more off to his left. All right, so that wraps up how to fix an uneven bar position on the squat. And like I said, you may or may not need to fix it. It really comes down to the factors I mentioned before on if it's actually causing issues that need to be addressed. And if it is, point number one, make sure to get yourself lined up under the bar by someone to make sure you're even in the first place, even if it feels weird at first. Make it turn habitual. Point number two, make sure your grip position or grip pressure is symmetrical and you're not overly gripping on one side and being more passive on the other. And then lastly, it could possibly be linked back to some type of shoulder mobility issue, which is forcing you to compensate with your grip, which is then leading to the uneven bar position. And you might need to address the shoulder mobility a little bit. But either way, it's a pretty simple fix. It's easier said than done, but it's pretty simple. It's just simply making sure that bar is lined up on your back correctly and everything is even. And just from being accountable to those simple things, I've seen numerous people fix their bar position. And I've still yet to see anything needing to be overly complicated to fix one of these issues before. So if you have any questions though, feel free to ask below. Make sure to like the video, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. I'm hopefully gonna do some more content in the short form manner because it's definitely easier for me to put out. So if you enjoyed this, let me know and I'll see if I can do some more shorter stuff versus my typical 1 to sometimes 2 hour long stuff. To be able to kind of get some more info out to you guys. But until next time, I'll talk to you later.